Just to give you a quick overview of what we're going to go through today, we're going to talk a little bit about the Anatomage use I did an exploration to get student feedback. I'm going to give you some course summaries that they went through using all of the technologies and all the tools I use. Talk about how I got to the place where I'm speaking to you today and how I really bring meaning to my anatomy course in working with the students that I work with. So buckle up and here we go. We're going to get started and jump right in. So what I want to do is start off, I have my PhD in rehabilitation science. I teach in occupational therapy. So one of the things I wanted to do was probe a little bit of the students' perception when I first started using the Anatomage table. So it was more of like a quality improvement. It wasn't a formal study or anything like that. And I had a very, very tiny number of students who responded to me. But I took a look at their perception of the Anatomage table when I first started using this platform in 2019 and then, until now. So I thought, every once in a while, students will respond to my survey that's out there. So I just wanted to let you know that none of the students that actually responded, so 14 students respond, and none of them had actually experienced gross anatomy or the Anatomage prior to actually using it in my class. So it's really interesting that when the students responded, most of them use animal cadavers in their previous experience with anatomy. And another third of them just relied on models that were the muscles and bones. So they really didn't have any ability to explore gross anatomy. If they did, they didn't get to do anything hands-on with it. So really what I was looking at was how did the Anatomage table really help with their learning. So I did a quantitative and a qualitative examination, and overall they had positive responses. And I'll put the graph up on the screen to show you that the number one impact that Anatomage had on their learning of anatomy was that it increased their knowledge. But what I really thought was important were the other top responses too, that they felt more capable, they felt more efficient, they were willing to take on the new challenge of learning the table. More importantly for me as an OT, they were able to demonstrate the skills from the Anatomage table and trust in their abilities. So overall, I had some really positive feedback from my students from using the Anatomage table. And being a PhD in occupational therapy, I am a qualitative researcher it's my heart and my passion. So of course, I don't just settle for survey responses. I really ask the students how they felt and what their perceptions were using the table. So I'm just going to give you a couple summaries of the themes that I kind of reached from that exploration of them. Again, the 14 students. So what they were saying was they were able to view virtual cadavers without the rush and demands and the stress that may come from using a human cadaver. What they liked about the table was that it allowed them to enlarge organs and bony structures that are normally really hard to identify on the actual size cadaver. When you're not leaning over and trying to dig, they would blow things up and make them really big. They liked that they could remove structures to really dig deeper into the structures and the ligaments and the bones, or move things out of the way without really doing any damage to the tissues or underlying structures. They could just, cut things out and take a peek. They loved the undo button. And those of you that use the table, I'm sure you love the undo button as much as I do. If they made a mistake or had a misstep, it wasn't like they cost or ruined a cadaver. They actually were like, oh, no big deal. I can just hit undo, or I can restart and completely do it all over again. So they really liked that it was almost like an error-free way to do things, or they weren't going to hurt or break anything or cause any damage. So they really liked that. And they loved the ability to be able to label the parts. So that's the great thing about some of the assignments and structures and activities that I do with them, is they can label externally using Word or using PowerPoint, or they can label right on the table and they can take screenshots and do things like that. So they loved the ability to create their own cheat sheets and study guides. And of course, those of you probably wouldn't suspect this one, but it's not surprising. They like to be able to go to lab without feeling or smelling gross. So we call this the not so gross anatomy. My anatomy course, I will tell you, is in Florida in the summer. So it's really nice that we don't have to worry about keeping the gross anatomy cadavers cold and in storage in the 90+ temperatures with 100+% humidity that we have here in Florida. So they really like that they can go to lab without that experience. So just having some positive perceptions of the Anatomage table really kind of pushed me into using it and really expanding it further. And one of the things I did want to say is, Jake did mention this, but I'm a pediatric specialist. I'm an occupational therapist by trade with quite a few years of experience. I'm a behavior analyst who specializes in working with children with autism. So right now I'm an assistant professor at Jacksonville University, and most of the content I teach is very heavy in occupational therapy, practicing in pediatrics, practicing and doing research techniques, really, supervising students through their capstone projects and things like that. So that really was interesting when I was asked to teach anatomy in 2019. I was like, okay, because I've never taught it before. I hadn't had anatomy since I was in occupational therapy school back in the 1990s. So it was really interesting that when you're asked to be a professor, sometimes you get this question about what are you comfortable teaching? What could you teach with your eyes closed? What would you need a little bit of a refresher in? And what do you think you would completely need to retake and learn all over again from the ground up? Well, that's kind of where I was with anatomy. I was like, I can teach anything pediatrics, anything behavior, anything occupational therapy, but I needed to dive in and really learn anatomy. So in a way, it's a good thing that I was fresh to the Anatomage table, because not only did I have to learn a new technology, I also had to learn anatomy and I had to teach it. And I didn't get much time. I got a few weeks notice to know that, hey, you're jumping in and teaching anatomy. So if I can do this, and I started it in 2019, and I taught through a pandemic, and I got remote access for my students so they could dissect virtually from their own homes when we weren't able to go into lab, you can do it too. So you just need to have a little drive and a little energy, but I'm trying to show you some of that today to show that it is possible and it is doable. So along with that, my course that I teach in the first semester of their graduate experience is called Applied Functional Anatomy. So the purpose behind this class is to get all of the students on the same page, to really get them starting to think about the human body and the structures that we need to know as occupational therapists in the future. So this is the philosophy that I use, Miller's skills competence of performance scales. So I start with knowing. They have to know anatomy, but as an occupational therapist, you really have to practice and do, and you have to have the skills to show the skills and have to know how to do these things. So to me, in this one course I teach over the summer, my goal is to really take them from knowing what the structures are to how they apply in practice, and really can they actually demonstrate the skills necessary to use anatomy. It's a daunting task in one class, but I think I've been pretty successful with it because I use a multi-method, multimodal approach to teaching that I'm going to go through with you today. One of the things I want to talk about is we started with what's called table and closet. So we had a small room where our table was located, one table starting out at Jacksonville University. And if you see that white pole in the background there on the right side of the screen, that is like a sewer line. So right behind this closet was a bathroom. So literally we would be in lab and we would hear toilet flushes and we would be distracted by that. And you'd know when class has changed because you hear a rush of toilets flushing. So it was a pretty interesting location to have lab. But I'm sure some of you have been in worse locations or better locations. But we started off and I would split the screens too. You can see potentially on that there are two different images on the screen. But the students really, really enjoyed working with the table and couldn't get enough of it. And with only having this really small space, plus the toilet distractions, it was really one of those interesting struggles for me in my first semester of teaching this in 2019 to figure out how the heck am I going to make this work more. So I was fortunate enough to actually have access to one of the Concourse versions, which is just, it's like a tabletop version that's in a CPU. So I brought that in and I said, you know what, I started using that in the lab room where the students were. So as you can see here, I had some students down in the closet working on the table, but I had more students clamoring around the Concourse version and really wanting to use that. And they just loved it. They wanted more. And you can see they're all working together. They're laughing about, they're creating their own images. They're doing their exploration. So there are 6 students around here. There were bones all over the table there, even some snacks and some hand sanitizer, but where were they? They were focused on actually seeing the Concourse version. So I was thinking we need a new version of this. We need something that can be a little bit more mobile and a little bit more portable. So, fortunately, one thing that COVID did was kind of push Anatomage into really thinking of how they could stay ahead of the curve with some of this technology, because the Concourse was just something they were testing out. But what ended up being created due to the pandemic was the cloud-based version. So they had table on cloud. So I was able to kind of start working with a version of that to allow my students to actually interact with the table more remotely. So they had a cloud version that we could start with. And thank goodness we had that, because that really started to give the students the chance to have more exploration outside of class, to have this usage of it where they weren't so limited to just our one table that was in the closet. And that was some of the early feedback I got was, I wish I could access this outside of class. So having that cloud version was really useful. I will tell you though, don't use it with too many students at the same time because you will crash it. I've done it. So it's a bandwidth, limitation. So you have to be careful about that. And then another thing that Anatomage actually worked really proactively with was pushing out their ebook. So making, again, another version of some technology that we could use at our fingertips to allow the students to study and engage more. So I added the ebook in last year during the pandemic, where we really could have our students being, again, remote and virtual and having some of this technology. They're Gen Z, so they love being able to access technology. It's at their fingertips. They're on their screens all the time. So I actually went from using the trail guide to anatomy to the ebook in class with the students and could really make it more engaging by having the students use the ebook in class. And then as Jake was saying, I was fortunate enough to be able to remote into my table to actually create virtual experiences for the students as well. And you'll see me kind of using some of that technology today as I'm talking to all of you. But all four of these have really made me really bring my course to this very cohesive, very engaging process where the students pretty much have anatomy at their fingertips. As long as they have, a Wi-Fi connection or the bandwidth to do it, they can really access Anatomage anywhere they want to. So this is all great, and technology is fabulous, but it's only fabulous if it's used. So that's one of the things that we really want to make sure their students actually use the stuff that's at their fingertips, and it's not just something that they keep on their computers or they never access. So that's really where we as the teachers come in, is getting them engaged and getting them motivated and getting them using it. So that's where I'm going to talk to you about how I've really pushed some of that to really bring it to them. So this is where I'm going to show you, and this is like an example of one of my slides. So it seems like in class, literally I pop things up on my lecture slides and it's there, but it takes a bunch of work and magic behind the scenes to really make things happen. So what I have to do, I do have to move the Zoom screen out of the way. There we go. So, it really takes a lot to make the magic happen, to make it look seamless and to make it look really engaging and kind of like connected and streamlined in the process. So I use a lot of multi-methods. I'll bring in videos, I'll bring in pictures, I'll bring in illustrations, I'll bring in the textbook, so many different things to show them all of this to try to bring anatomy to life. So for example, here's an example of just an image from an illustration. It's two-dimensional of the lungs from one of my units. And then you can see over here, those of you that are familiar with the table, these are actual lungs from one of the cadavers. And these are real people. And that's what I tell my students. These are actual individuals who had actual medical conditions and who had their own unique characteristics to them. So I would actually say, okay, here are the lungs and this is what they look like in a two-dimensional perspective. But then I actually will also create videos for them to be able to bring it to life three-dimensionally. And we'll have some conversations as we're talking. I'll show them the videos and we'll have a discussion about it. And then I can go through, and while I'm using these videos, I'll cut away different structures so they can compare and contrast to the actual structures in an illustration or a photo, and they can actually compare them to the Anatomage table. And then they love seeing those structures and seeing the breakdown. So this is an example of one of the videos that I've embedded within my presentations to show the students how things actually look in a human being. So I do engage, so this is engaging in the lectures, right? Getting them involved in the content, getting them excited about what you're learning, because as you know, anatomy can be quite dry at times. So I actually like to pull in as much of the video perspective or the photo perspective as I can. Lectures should be visual representations, not just a bunch of words on the screen. So for example, when we were doing the cardiovascular system, I took screenshots of table shots of Victor and Carl. So Victor's on the top and Carl's on the bottom. So it's our Asian male and our Caucasian male. And I start off putting this slide up there to say, okay, we're going to be working with these two gentlemen today in lab, but do you notice a difference between the two of them and their cardiovascular systems? Because we are talking about applied functional anatomy and what this means. So just putting these two individuals side by side for them on the tables, it's fine. Now I have three tables, so I can pull up different images side by side on the tables, but seeing them back so close together, right next to each other, they can have a conversation. Well, wow, Carl looks like he has a lot more, cardiovascular blood supply to his lower legs. And I'm like, well, why do you think that is? And we have some discussions and some conversations just right away from using the tables in lecture. It's another one. Like I said, I like to use video. We're still on our cardiovascular, so I took a screenshot of a vertical view to just use it as that picture to draw them in for what we're going to talk about when we talk about our objectives. So I try to bring in some of these things to really bring it to life and really get them thinking about what we're going to be talking about in that unit for the day. So of course, you know, they're Gen Z and they're younger students. So I like to add in some memes and have some fun. So this was the unit when we were talking about the cranial nerves. So I went in and gave them some color to make it pop when I took the picture. And then I add in some memes because they're quite stressed about the cranial nerves. So adding in some of those things always gets some snickers and kind of wakes them up a little bit. So having some of these fun memes or GIFs in there, GIFs and how is it GIFs or GIFs? There's a big discussion as to how you say it. But I'll bring in, you know, some of those pictures to bring it in and bring it to life and just get a little chuckle out of my students. So how do I do that? How do I bring these pictures in? How do I bring these in? On my PC that I have right now, I have Windows 11. So it's now Snip and Sketch. There's a snip tool if it's a PC, and I think it's Command Apple 4 if you're doing it on a Mac where you're trying to get your screenshots. It does look like magic when you do it, but it's really just bringing in some screenshots from the table. And I will tell you, you can actually take, there's a camera shot, there's a camera right on the Anatomage table where you can take pictures and save them either to a flash drive or to your hard drive and email them to yourself or bring up your PowerPoint on the table. This is where the virtual pieces really shine. Being connected to my table remotely or being on the cloud, it's on my screen already for me. So I can just pull those pictures right in and use them as I'm creating my images. So these are some examples of some photos that I've taken for the cranial nerves and when we were looking at the scapula. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you how I do this on my table. So I'm actually going to hit escape on my slide. So you can now see my actual PowerPoint that's right there. And in the background, I have my table up and running. So here it is. So this is Victor in his glory on my Anatomage table that's on my screen. And then I'll say, okay, well, I want to take away the skin so we can look at the muscles. So as you all know, those of you that are familiar with the table, you can one click, remove some of the skin there so you can get to those muscular structures. And then I have my snip and sketch tool right in my taskbar at the bottom. I click right on that. It pulls it up. I hit new and I can say, oh, I'll take a picture of him here and we'll do this. And I'll just screenshot it. Then it doesn't look so great. Well, I want a new one. Okay, I didn't get his full shoulder in there. I want to do that. There's my picture. I copy, I bring it over, and I pop it in. Pretty simple to bring it in, and then you can enlarge it. Now, one thing I will show you that I do as a little secret trick for this is, as you can see, the background is gray, just for that neutrality of the background. It's not so harsh to have some of those colors in there. I do this little cheat in a way to make it look like it's immersed or really pulled as part of my slides. So I'll go in when I'm creating my lecture content and I'll actually change the background to be white. So when I do that, I can go into my snip tool and actually then if I go back to my snipping tool and I do my new image and then I pop it in, just showing you an example. And then I bring it in, then it's white on the screen. And then you can see when we have it, it loves to do design ideas for me. Go back to my, whoops, there you go. And you can see how it's now immersed right in and almost hidden within the PowerPoint as it is. So that's one of the cool ways that I bring in the snip pictures. I'll make them bigger, I'll make them smaller, I'll rotate them. Sometimes I take multiple pictures just to make sure I get it right. I get a little down that rabbit hole where sometimes it takes me 15 minutes to capture one image with multiple screenshots, but that's the beauty of it. You can snip, you can do all these things to really pull it in and make the magic happen. So that's how I'll pull in my snip and sketch to bring it into my PowerPoints and actually show it. But sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes the students want more and it's still two-dimensional. Even the Anatomage table at times, they can say it's two-dimensional. I want to be able to touch it. I want to be able to feel it. I want to be able to see it and explore it. Well, you can't really pick the person up and manipulate them, but you can't really do that with a gross anatomy human cadaver anyway. They're very fragile. And if you start picking them up and moving them, you're going to dislocate a shoulder or break bones or tear muscles or tissue. They're very fragile and can't really be handled very aggressively. So you have to be able to really manipulate and play and move things around. So one of the features I do is I pull a lot of videos into my lectures. So as you can see some examples here, when I'm talking to my students, I'll say, we're going to talk about the lower extremity muscles, and they're in groups. So thinking of the muscles as they would work in groups, you can see the hamstrings are one color, the glutes are another color. Then I've done the quadriceps is another color. So I'll color code it to get their brain thinking about where these groups of muscles are. And that's what I love about the Anatomage table too, is you can color code things and make them pop. So they love to see the color coded videos, and I rotate it around to kind of show them where those muscles are. And even on this one, I've done superficial and deep. So on the left leg, it's the deep muscles, and on the right side, it's the superficial muscles. So that's an example of one of those videos. Another one I've done when we were looking at the extensors of the wrist. I actually labeled them and had the labels so they could see them. And then I'll click through my video and highlight each muscle, which also highlights the label and shows them where those muscles are. And then I'll do a little rotation through and I'll show them where those muscles are in relation to the arm. One thing we have to remind our students is they're not in anatomical position. So rotating it so they can see it in anatomical position also helps, but kind of shows them that the muscles are in this specific location. And then here's an example of one at the bottom where that week that I did the slides, I actually had a cream colored background. So I changed the Anatomage background to be cream colored, but I left it in here so you could see that this is the actual border of the video that I took. And this was what I also used the tool where you can slice the cadaver in half and you can do this, the cross section view. And that's what this is. I literally sliced them in half and I started labeling the parts of the spinal cord and the spinal column. And I would put the, and highlight them in my video, and the labels would pop up so the students could then see them as I'm talking about things in that unit, and they have these videos. And the great thing is these videos are embedded into their slides, so they can actually go back and look at them and review them on their own time afterwards if they would like to. So those are some examples of the videos. So what I'm actually going to do now is show you how I do that as well. So Ice Cream Recorder is a free program that you can download, and that's what I use to make my video demos. There are many other ways you can do this out there, but that's just the one that Anatomage recommended that I use, and I started using it, and it's working really great for me. So I will do the same thing where we kind of, we escape out of our PowerPoint so you can actually see the slides. We'll go down to that one here, and then you can see my Ice Cream Recorder is right here coming up onto the screen. Again, it's in my bar at the bottom so I can have access to it. Here comes Victor on the table. So then if I want to take a video, I do custom area a lot of times, and I'll make sure, let me make him a little smaller so we can actually, he's moving a little slower. There we go. And then I'll pull my video back up and I do custom area. And then this is where it gets a little tricky. Sometimes you have to make sure that your video surface area is big enough for you to do rotations or movements or do any labeling or anything like that you want. I hit my record. It gives me a couple seconds to get ready. And then I can rotate and do all the good stuff that I like to do with the Anatomage table. I can label things. I can click on them and I can actually, remove it if I want to. And that's why sometimes in my videos, you'll see that. I can actually click here and I can shadow if I want to show them the deeper structures, but I want them to be able to still get the perspective. I love that shadow feature. You can also color code. You can do everything you would normally do on your table. And, when I'm recording the videos, I'm thinking in my brain what I'm going to be talking about and how I'm going to be using it. And then I hit stop. It saves my video. So let's just call it demo video. Okay, we're going to just save that quickly. And then it's now saved. So I go back to my PowerPoint, and then this is where, let's close out of that. So it's not still on my screen. And then you can see the feature for this slide. It's the one that has the single attachment for the box, and you can see you can pull in different features. If you click the video one, it allows you to then go in and pull in right from where they're saved. So there's my video embedded in my slide again. If I go back to my PowerPoint, and then it's there. And I can push play on the video, check it out, and the video, and you can see again with the white background, it's immersive right within that slide. So the content is there. So you can see, oh, I'm like, oh, that would up there at the top. I don't like that. I'd probably go record it again because I'm a little OCD about things like that. But just to kind of show you how you can pull those videos in and bring the Anatomage table within your lectures or within your content when you're working with the students, or even if you're recording like I had to do in 2020, I had to teach a lot of this content online. So the videos actually became quite helpful for me to be able to record some of this content and then do voiceovers on my videos when I was taking them. So that's an example of how I use the screen recorder. Another thing I talked about in the very beginning was we have access to the ebook. And this is an example of what one of my slides look like we use the Segan Adams musculoskeletal anatomy book that gives great two-dimensional pictures that the students can learn origin insertions, actions, nerves. They can learn all of that. That's the guide for our anatomy course. So we use that book, and this is some of the information pulled from that textbook with a direct link to the rotator cuff within the ebook. And then again, I've pulled in just to make it visual again, because the students like visuals. And I don't want it to be too wordy on their slides. I give them a picture of what the rotator cuff looks like. And this is Victor's rotator cuff from the ebook, because Victor's our primary feature in the ebook. So I bring that in and I use that example. And this is just a screenshot of what it looks like. This is an actual example of one of my slides where I have the ebook embedded within the course. So for example, multiple methods of bringing the students into the curriculum. This is a screenshot of the spinal nerve that we're going to be talking about that's within the ebook. This is a two-dimensional picture that they would find in their textbook. And then I actually go through my content. We talk about the posterior roots and the anterior roots. We discuss where they are on the actual spinal nerve. I go through my different little pieces, and then I actually click on the ebook itself, and it'll pull up the link to actually let me get directly into my ebook and access the unit that I pulled this from. So what's nice about this is the students also can click the link. They have access to the ebook because it's used within our course, and I can give them a few minutes to take a peek, find things, scroll through, see what they want to see, take a peek at it, and then again, for studying on their own after the fact, they now know which chapter has been assigned and where it's at, and they can get to it very quickly to discuss and see the unit that we're talking about within their actual course content. So building in the ebook within the lecture, I say the link is there, you can click on it. If I don't want them to have the link, I just put it in my copy and I don't share it to them. But for the most part, I give them the link within there, even though it's assigned. Sometimes they don't pay attention to the assignment. It's right there within their slides, and they can click on it when they have that lecture content to study. Another example, again, just showing you lots of different ways I use it. Keeping the white background is also very visually appealing because it's high contrast for the students. But again, a two-dimensional picture when we're talking about the ligaments and the folds and the different structures. And then as I was going through this video and I was highlighting things and talking about some of those structures, again, you can see me using the tool there. I rotate through, I show them the depth of where things are. I shadow out a ton. I love that shadowing perspective. It doesn't just remove the organ, it actually shows that it's still there, but you can almost see how deep those structures are. And I'm highlighting some things and I'm talking about them. And then at one point, I cut away so we can start to look at the recesses in the cavity. And then as I'm cutting it away, you notice that the appendix is really large. So I'm like, I'm going to color code that and take a second to say, what do you see going on here? What is it? And then they're like, well, I don't know what a normal appendix looks like. So I'm like, well, Google it. Or let's go to Carl on the table. So I'll pause the lecture. We'll go to the remote connection or the table on cloud, and we'll pull up one of the images and we'll see it. But this one, we talk about how his appendix is enlarged, and it leads us to a conversation about some of those structures again, because these are real human beings who had certain conditions. So we can take a peek at and see that there are some of those conditions that they had that can draw attention to us looking at them as an actual human. So just to kind of give you another example of how that's in there. Now, I will say I have a lot of favorites in the Anatomage table, but I think my favorite one is probably color coding. Once I discovered that and got comfortable with that, I go a little crazy. with it. Maybe it's the OT in me and the artsy and arts and crafts and the pediatrics in me. I don't know, but I love color coding things. So when we were learning the carpals, this was their intro to the carpal bones of the hand. And I put that up and I said, okay, today we're going to learn about the carpal bones, and I color coded them. And then I've also color coded when we're starting to learn the many, many muscles of the feet. And I flipped, this was Carl, and I kind of flipped his foot around. So I put them lengthwise. So sometimes it takes a little skill in manipulating how you're going to get these images. And then I went into Word and I put the 1, 2, 3 labels on there and said, what are these? What are these? What are these? So we do some non-grade based kind of quizzes in class, or some just knowledge checks in class. I'll do it through Kahoot sometimes, where I'll ask them, what is this? What is this? And then we'll kind of go through and have them start to have discussions about what those muscles are. And then I take the colors away, and all of a sudden they have to find them on their own. But they're like, that was the yellow one. I remember that was the yellow one. It's kind of funny how they link the colors to it. And then here's another example of where I use the colors to really help them understand and really show how the Anatomage table can shine. Because when you're looking at an actual cadaver, everything is like one color, and arteries, nerves, and veins all look the same color. And I have been mean, I will say, and I just color code everything the same color, and they have to figure out what it is. But when we're learning, depending on where they're at in their learning process and how far along we are, I will color code so we can get that initial learning and start to trace the paths of some of these nerves. So when we were doing the brachial plexus, which is a very complex network of nerves within the human body, this is where I love being able to be that three-dimensional perspective. It runs behind muscles into the armpit and down and around. So I wanted to kind of show them the three-dimensional portion of how that brachial plexus can be so impaired and so impacted if there's some sort of impingement in the shoulder girdle, and really show them that this is not something that is, needs to be or manhandled. You need to protect the brachial plexus. So going through there and showing where those nerves run under the clavicle and through those muscles, and then they can go back and rotate as they see fit and really take a peek, getting that three-dimensional perspective. So it really pulls it off the screen and pulls it off the table for them to get that three-dimensional view. So those are some of the ways I use it. Again, being that applied functional anatomy, going from knowing to doing, when we're starting to really talk about why you're learning these muscles and knowing what those muscles are, the next phase of it is taking it into that being able to show and demonstrate type phase. So using our Siegen Adams guide, where it talks about the primary movers and the assist movers. This is Carl, who I love because his muscle structures are huge. So Carl's the Caucasian male, and I'll go in, he has great muscle structure. So when I'm doing any of my muscle discussions, he's the cadaver I go to because he's just got such fabulous muscle tone. So I go in and I highlighted on one of the pictures of Carl. These are the book that they'd be learning. So very flat picture, very one-dimensional, and not really what the human body looks like. So using Carl, I went in and color coded the primary movers and the assist movers, again, just to put a visual on the screen for them to talk about what we're going to be learning in class and in lab today. And then right away tying it to function. What occupations would use hip flexion? So they're looking at those muscles and they're looking at those pictures and they're thinking about their hip and they're like, oh, well, I wouldn't be able to sit in a chair. So we really start to talk about all those different things that could be impacted and really bringing in. And I'll do this for every one of the movers and every one of the groupings. So it's taken me a while to create this content, but now that I have this content, it's really good and really, really great for me to have this in the class when I can go to for the students when they have questions. So then taking it to a step further, we had Carl with his muscles, and now we can talk about the separate movements. We have similar actions and we have opposing actions, and we have actions that work together and muscles that one will contract and one will relax. And it's, we go on and we can have these deep discussions. And again, I'll color code them and put them on the screen as we're starting our discussion so they can see, well, these are the hamstrings and these are the, hip flexors and which ones are doing what to the hip and how they're working, just to kind of give them some of that perspective and discussion. There's not many words on this slide. This is the slide. I'll put it up on the screen and we'll start to talk about it and break it down, and they'll have to identify what muscles that, what grouping are these, and we'll have lots of discussions and lots of talk about these things. And then they'll follow it up by creating their own study guides and their own charts and graphs and pictures in my anatomy class in the lab. So just some examples. Now, we are going to be occupational therapists coming out of our class. And we don't really work with the body that's a cadaver. We work with living, breathing human beings that look differently, act differently, have different skin tones, different muscle tones. So I will have them work a lot on each other. They'll be touching, they'll be palpating, they'll be feeling. I'll put pictures up like this one. This was one that I actually used a lot when we had the pandemic and we couldn't be face to face, and say, okay, now I need you to find these landmarks. Now I need you to find these muscles. Now I need you to find these structures. Do you see any abnormalities? Do you see any issues with, like, is there something that's different? Is there a scoliosis potentially? What conditions do you see? How would you find these structures if they're wearing clothing, if they have darker skin? So going through and having lots and lots of discussions and pulling in some of those actual pictures. And as you'll see in a few slides, I actually use Carl too with his skin. So I bring him in and we have to identify some structures on his skin. So these are just some examples of how I use, and now bringing it to that knowing and demonstrating piece, from knowing to demonstrating, like how would you actually find these structures on a human being and on each other? So that being said, one of the things they wanted to know was, I need to be able to use this table outside of class. I want more, and they wanted more. And having the cloud was able to give them more. So again, I did mention that the cloud version is driven by Amazon. So it's a bandwidth driven program. So when I work with my students, I tell them no more than 4 should be on the cloud at the same time. Because first of all, if you're on 4 of them are on the table, it gets a little cluttered and crowded too. So they work in either pairs or groups of 2, 3, or 4, but no more than 4 because it'll slow it down. When you're in there, it kind of sucks down the bandwidth. So what Anatomage did, and they helped me create, was one of a spreadsheet. And I gave you the directions here for how to validate and create. You can look that up. But one of the things that I have is a sign-up sheet. So I have my students using the sign-up sheet, and I'm going to show you again that we have our signups based upon the days of the week. My students' names are here, and then they go in. This chart is linked within our Blackboard LMS. We use Blackboard in our class, and they go in and they sign up for when they want to use the table. Now, since we're connected to the table in my class, it says not available on these days because we're using it during lab and lecture. But you can see some students sign up. They have different times of the day. There are some that love to use it late at night. So they'll sign up at midnight because they're night owls. As you can see, when we get closer to our final exams, see here or the midterms, a lot more students sign up and they reserve the table. And working in their groups is when they actually, one of the group members will reserve the table, and I tell them no more than a 2-hour block at a time. And then, oh, believe me, they let me know very quickly if someone has signed up for more than 2 hours. So they like to use the cloud. They love it to not just use it for the perspective of their assignments, but for studying and really playing with it and creating some images as their own study guide. So they have gone in and used it quite a bit. And that's another thing. It's an honor system, but they have to go in and sign up on our spreadsheet for access to the Anatomage table after hours on the cloud. So here's an example now of an assignment that I've created for them. So I had them using, with the 3 tables we have, or in the cloud, the 3 images are up, the high resolution brain, the high resolution head and neck, and then the prosection brain. So they have to go in and they have to rotate the brain so they can see the 12 cranial nerves, take a screenshot of the brain with them identified so they can label them right on the table. They can take a screenshot and label it in Word. They can do whatever they want. They can color code them. You should see some of the pictures I get from the students. It's really nice to actually see their engagement and their creativity. They don't just take a screenshot and upload it. They really take the time to create these, because I've told them, these are your study guides. These are what you need to learn, and this is how you're going to learn. So they really put in a lot of time and effort. And now that we're coming out of the end of the pandemic too, we've actually increased the amount of time they can be in lab because they're so engaged in the table and really immersed in it, because I give them actual assignments that are tied to the table. I don't just say, oh, go explore the cranial nerves and let me know when you're done. I say, explore the cranial nerves, take a screenshot, label them, and then submit that as part of your assignment. So that's showing me that they've actually used the table or used the cloud version. And then they have the high resolution brain for the cervical plexus. And then I love to pull up the prosections, the actual, within the Anatomage table, you have a lot of actual cadaver pictures. And when I'm in the classroom with them or in the lab space, I will pull up the cadaver brain. It's like this big, and I'll put it side by side with one of the high resolution brains that they can blow up to make like 2 by 2, like 2 feet by 2 feet. And then they have this like 8-inch brain. And I'm like, okay, find the cranial nerves. Because if you were in gross anatomy, that's what you'd be working with. And they're like, get me away from this. I want the Anatomage table. I want to be able to see it. I want to be able to explore it. I want to make it big, and they want to rotate it and really have a lot of fun. But just to bring it back to the actual human body, I will pull up the pro sections, or I'll put it at 1:1, and they can see it in actual size, so to speak. So that's when they have to upload their assignments and do that and kind of work within the table. Again, when we were in the pandemic and I had some difficulties, we use a lot of the composite bones when we're doing some of the bony landmarks and learning that way in our class. I didn't really have the luxury of doing that because they weren't on campus. So I went in and I created my own images where they had to do the bony landmarks, and these are Victor, because Victor has the highest level of resolution, I believe. He's the Asian male. And I would go in and I would create these images, taking away everything but the foot, rotate it so I could see it. And then I went in and created actual arrows and things in Word documents and pulled them into my PowerPoints or into their assignments. And they had to label them, because when they're in their tests, they have to be able to identify bony landmarks, whether it's on Victor, whether it's on Carl, whether it's Carla, whether it's Vicky. They don't know which cadaver they're going to get, but they have to be able to identify the structures. So creating some of these for study guides was really helpful, both in and out of the pandemic. On the right side of the screen, you can also see, that should look familiar. That's the actual spinal nerve, the spinal cross section from the ebook. And I just colored it black and white so they could actually then color code and do what they wanted to do and then label it themselves. So you can go into the ebook and use the ebook and look at it all you want, but having a nice study guide and something to be able to use to help you identify what those structures are, again, gets them involved and gets them engaged and gets them learning, because they can actually create their own answers and their own work that's submitted for assignments. So then, bringing it into the exams and quizzes, there's Carl with his image that I showed you that I wanted them to be able to identify structures and landmarks. When we were doing a practice quiz for some of the muscles in the back, I grouped them into colors and said, what grouping is this? What category is this? Or what is the function of this group of muscles? So I'll do things like that sometimes when I use the color coding. And then again, during the pandemic, I didn't have the ability to have my composite bones or my table. So I had to create a lot of these images for them. You can see I've done the nerves of the brachial plexus there that they have to identify. And the top right picture is actually the pins that you can use to create tests on your actual table. So that's one of the ones of the cranial nerves that we've used, and I've shown you quite a few examples of. But I will have the students, again, using our Blackboard LMS, the learning management system. I'll create a question in the test that has 10 responses, and depending upon the level of learning that I want to, or challenge I want to give them, I'll either make it fill in, or I'll give them a matching bank of 15 random names of nerves. I'll throw some other ones in there, and I have them identify which pin is this, and and I'll put them in there on the Anatomage table. Station 1, identify the cranial nerves, and then the questions are embedded within their LMS. So they actually we have those little high-low tables that you kind of see in a hospital room. We have a few of those next to our tables. The students can wheel the table with their laptop or their tablet on it. I lock the table down so they can't identify or label anything, and they are in full test mode. So they are exploring and digging into the Anatomage table to take their exams and their quizzes. And they actually enjoy it. They're like, oh, okay, that wasn't so bad. They get really scared and nervous when they're taking their exams, but when they're finished, they kind of nod their heads and are good. And and what I love about it is they can rotate it. They can make it as big as they want. I don't care how big they make it. I don't care how much they rotate it. But creating these tests for them to really be able to explore and learn those structures has been very beneficial for the students. So again, some examples of how I bring in, whether it's embedded into the test with a picture or whether I actually have them on the tables for a practical exam. It's got so many uses that we can really bring into the class. So that all being said, again, I like my memes that I ask them, every year as a faculty member, we get course feedback, and the students kind of give their impressions of the class. And like I said, the technology is only as good as their use and their engagement and their understanding of it. So I showed you a little bit in the beginning of that small, examination I did of the 14 students and the feedback they gave about the use of the actual table. But when it comes to the anatomy course, that's really what we're concerned about, is how well did they gain the content? What did they get out of the class? The anatomy course we teach is in the first semester of their graduate experience. So this is one of the first experiences they have with graduate school, and it really sets the bar for them to go through the next 3 years of our program. So it's really important for me to take their feedback and understand how I can make it better and how I can improve. So just some of the general themes, again, I'm a qualitative researcher, so that they kind of expressed with their feedback was it's both me and the course. So the way she portrayed information made me feel more motivated to understand and grasp content to be successful. I didn't like anatomy in undergrad, but having a teacher that makes learning interesting really helped me with getting through it. And then here's another one more specific to Anatomage. I'm very grateful we were able to use Anatomage and really learn a lot from the other tools and resources. I feel like this class has given us a strong foundation. Another one, Dr. Brown made class enjoyable, humor, smile, so I make it fun. Put the fun in functional anatomy. I think that's kind of cute that they put that there. Dreaded going to anatomy, but I changed their view. It's a hard class, but I made it fun and enjoyable despite how hard it could get. And then it's not the easiest, but again, you can see the feedback. It's fun, exciting. People in my classes were excited about anatomy. They're talking about fun. They're talking about exciting. That's really what surprised me about teaching anatomy, is keeping the students engaged. I didn't ever think I'd hear a student describe anatomy as something that's fun or exciting, but they said having the Anatomage truly helped them get through the course, and it was awesome that they got to have access from home. So that was, again, more feedback about combining all that technology, bringing my enthusiasm, bringing my passion for teaching into the classroom to really make my students want to learn and really use this technology. I mean, I'm sure I only know this much about it, and there's only so much I can continue to do. I haven't been using it that long, and part of it was through the pandemic. So definitely something I'm always willing to learn. I'm always willing to try. The students will sometimes teach me some pretty amazing things. I'm like, where did you get that? How did you do that? And they show me how they did it on the table, or I'm like, that was such a great image. I need a copy of that. So they send me their slides they made or their pictures, and they're all proud of themselves because I want to use it in class. So definitely making them part of the process and part of the learning is key.